Hello and welcome back to our second season of our podcast, Invisible Wound. This limited 5-episode podcast series is part of our larger project called Hakara, Facing Transgenerational Trauma. This project was initiated by AMCHA Germany and funded by the German Foreign Office. AMCHA Germany supports the Israeli NGO AMCHA that was established in 1987 by a group of Holocaust survivors and devoted mental health professionals. AMCHA Israel offers psychosocial support for Holocaust survivors and their families in 15 centers across the country. My name is Sharon Ryba-Kahn. I'm a Berlin-based filmmaker and third generation of survivors of the Shoah. This is the perspective I'll be speaking from. In the first season of this podcast, we focused on the perspective of Aboriginal Australians and their experiences of collective transgenerational trauma. You can listen to the episodes on Spotify and YouTube. For this season, we have chosen a different approach. We will be talking to trauma experts and artists with different perspectives and different experiences of transgenerational, collective, and genocidal violence. What they have in common is their activism and engagement to address the effects of trauma throughout generations and societal boundaries. But now, let's welcome Saki. Welcome to the podcast Invisible Wound. We have a guest in the studio with us, and that is Saki. And we have the tradition of not introducing our guests, but of allowing them to introduce themselves so that they feel that they have the full space. So please, would you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me, Sharon. How can I introduce myself now to you? I'm in Berlin since several years, but I was in Hamburg to do my performance studies, and I just came back from there. And now I see myself as a performing artist, and I'm a sociologist and a researcher, and in education. This is what I do at the moment. And I was born in Germany. I'm a child of Yazidi immigrants from Syria and Turkey. And my grandparents were the first migrating to Germany in the 70s. And my nickname is Saki, but my given name is Jacqueline. And that's so far.
Okay, thank you for that. Saki, you know that the podcast is called Invisible Wound, and that the topic of the podcast, quite generally speaking, is collective transgenerational trauma. Where do you situate yourself in this quite heavy topic?
That's a big question. Where do I situate myself? I relate to it very much in a professional way. That may be at first to say to everybody who doesn't know that I'm actually in a network working to the topic transgenerational trauma. It's with AMCHA, and I kind of bring the Yazidi perspective to the table, since I also worked with survivors from genocide from 2014, because I worked with within trauma-sensitive attitude, you can say, in social work with families that came from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. And so I very much relate to it in a professional way. But I think what is most precious to me, or where I would locate myself personally, and where I would say this is where my heart blood is flowing into, to make transgenerational knowledge and wounds visible in my pieces that I bring to stage. And for me, it's not very much proper to talk about, like to define my pieces as pieces about trauma. I would say they come with it. When you're a Yazidi and when you are in diaspora and a child of immigrants from Turkey and Syria, so trauma comes with your work, transgenerational trauma comes with your work because you carry the knowledge of several centuries of persecution and colonization and systematic elimination. So even when you think you're telling a story even when you tell a love story, it always comes with trauma.
Thank you for that, for this very sensitive response. I already have a lot of questions about what you just said. You say it comes with your work, but you wouldn't call it like a trauma piece.
Never.
Why would you never say that? Because, it may seem obvious to you, but for someone who doesn't know your work, they may not quite understand it.
I wouldn't say it's even obvious to me. Like, you asked such a concrete question, and talking about trauma here and trauma there, we all tend in these networks of when I'm together with psychologists and psychotherapists in a network and at conferences and so on, we tend to be very concrete when talking about trauma. But when it comes to arts, I wouldn't say it's that obvious, because it's arts. Like, you can read it that way and put your own projection and story into what I show you, while I think I'm telling you this and this, something else, and coming from another place. So the moment I put something on stage, or the moment I'm even talking to you now and everybody's listening to me and you, I can't control what other people put into what we say now, I give you an example. It's not long ago when I showed my piece, Retourkillams, Kofferkinder. That's a historical name for children, that stayed in their home country when the parents and grandparents would go to Germany to work. So they would sit on their suitcases kind of and waiting for their parents to follow them, or waiting for the parents to come back. So they were called Kofferkinder. So I was showing that piece not long ago at a festival here in Berlin, and people started to cry while I was singing because they recognized the words and they remembered something and they felt something, and they were singing along. They were singing along and they were crying. So what happened, while watching my piece, we had a space of grief and we had a space of healing. And I mean, this is the best what can happen, to be honest, that I'm not just in front of an audience that consumes the piece, but because people also came to me and told me what they felt and what it done to them watching and hearing me. And they were surprised, but they were not expecting it, And I think it's because of the language in which I sang the song, and it's Kurmanji. It's a Kurdish dialect, and I can feel it in my rehearsals too, when I start to sing that Kurdish song or other songs again and again in a loop. And my work is also a lot about loops and infinity. And I can really feel that it gets physical and that I sometimes really have breakdowns and have to stop it because it's not just a singing piece. I start to kind of connect to my ancestors in that moment. I can really feel that what I'm singing now is nothing that belongs to the place I am, actually, that it's something, and it's words that were brought from generations ago, and I kind of feel that.
So it comes from the Yazidi tradition.
Yes, yes. And you know that when finding those words and creating that song, you know that it is knowledge that was transferred from mouth to mouth, you know? It's maybe the only story you can tell about a special village.
So in your work, to what extent do you even want to share knowledge? Is that maybe something that at times is even annoying for you?
I find it very interesting that you said to which extent I want to share knowledge to others, with others, and yeah, and when does it start to annoy me, you know? I have never thought that silence would annoy me so much as I experienced 2014, 2015, 2016. I think those years were one of the worst in my life because I never felt so lonely in the place I grew up, the society I grew up in, and and also the circle of friends. And because everyone seemed so overwhelmed by the genocide, the genocide in Shingal, Iraq. And I couldn't believe that, because I defined myself as a Yazidi, and I couldn't believe that the people around me who knew that I'm a Yazidi, that they couldn't bring up, the empathy or the understanding for what I was going through and what I needed. And it was so hard for me to articulate everything. No one knew how to react and what to feel when hearing hearing in the news what happens in Iraq, you know. And I was so in shock that I just did my road trip.
In what context were you there?
I was on vacation with friends and a good friend that lived there. And I remember that no one, like even those two, they asked no questions, said nothing. I remember that, like even the closest friends. And I think I had my part in that too. I was not talking about feelings, not being able to articulate what I think and what I feel when hearing those news, you know. And then when we got back to DC, the first thing I did was walking to the White House, because my feeling told me, when I'm looking for my people, then they must be in front of the White House. And then they were. And then we recognized each other, you know. I went straight to them, and I remember I recorded their voices, and they knew that I'm from Europe, and then they would say things like, tell our people back in Europe this and this and this, and we have to do blah, 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 blah. So I turned into the transmitter of news. It was my way to cope with what happened.
How did you feel about that?
Oh, from that day on, I knew that I'm leaving my old space and my old life, and that I'm getting closer to my siblings, my community. It was so clear because I never experienced such a loneliness as I experienced in DC or on that road trip. And also back in Berlin, like people would, I don't know what it was, would feel guilt or something, would feel guilt or whatever, I don't know. I think it was guilt people felt.
Did you speak about your feelings?
Of course, I told them, well, you know what, I felt so lonely. What happened? Can I tell you, like, can we talk about it? And and people told me that they've been overwhelmed, or they or they were angry, but they didn't want to overwhelm me with their anger, with their, they felt it's not the right place or not the right moment to express their anger in front of me, because they said, well, you must have been in such a grief or in your own process, so we didn't want to put our own stuff on your shoulders. I think also it's symptomatic for the German society. Like, why you don't just feel and are compassionate? Like, what's the problem to just listen and be compassionate? And as I told you, it was 2014 until 2016 to process it all. So you can't be disappointed like 3 years. So I had to decide to forgive, to accept what is there, and to find my own healing way through all that. So yes, I started to work with survivors. I started to do interviews with survivors. I was obsessively watching out for them, seeking them, all my love for my people and for the survivors. All that love is in everything I do now, Yes, and you asked me about the personal trauma. My mother would always tell me the story of being captured in her home country.
Was it her personal story or the story of others?
No, not her story, but that was something that was told. It was part of the narrative, the Yazidi narrative in Turkey. And I would never take that serious, I would always think, oh my God, why is she telling me that? Like, it was so abstract, it was so far away. And then it's the worst when you have 2014 and the first thing you hear in the news is that thousands of girls are captured by the IS. And that was the moment I thought, wow, okay, she was right, and there's something repeating in a crazy way,
The concept transgenerational trauma. What does it mean to you, or what does it symbolize for you?
Sometimes I think there's something that was given to me that I didn't ask for. And I'm talking about the way what feels safe. For example, for my parents, since they are in Germany, it was very important to have an own house. As soon as possible, buying a house. And people are laughing about that. They're saying, why would you build a house, buy a house? But I can see that it is a result of being persecuted and being nomadic. And I think the older I get, I can see that it's becoming more and more important for me how safe it has to feel where I live. And I never had this thought before, but I think this is very important for me.
So this is sort of a direct consequence of trauma, or maybe of having felt unsafe, and then...
I don't think it's trauma. I would say, because when being in public and also now when telling you that I define myself as a Yazidi or Kurdish person, then I know that people are criminalizing this category and are persecuting that. So it's still a fact that there's a reason why I feel not safe where I am,
You don't want to diminish the external fact. That's what you're saying, essentially, right now, because, of course, there is still discrimination going on.
There is still discrimination.
And persecution.
And also I grew up with attacks on migrant houses in Germany. So I remember that this was a thing, to know that people who look like me are under attack in Germany by fascists. There's also this, So, and a trauma, is something that is always renewed by racism and right-wing hate. I wouldn't just say it's a trauma. I would say it's a German reality we are talking about, and there's a reason why why when I look like this, how I look, and having the last name I have, I can't feel the same protection like the majority in Germany. Yeah.
I would love it if we could take a deeper look at your work as an artist.
Yeah, I have just one issue with how arts are perceived. Like when it's arts by immigrants and children of immigrants, there was this term back in the days, Migrantenkunst. And Migrantenkunst would be everything that was created by migrants in Germany, and it was a term that reduced the arts to the fact that it was created by the migrants. And I have this dilemma that on one side, of course, for me, it has meaning to be out there as a Yazidi body, to make a Yazidi, a female Yazidi body visible, and to tell my own story and to decide my own way how to be seen and what to tell. And so it is important to me to be known as a Yazidi. And on the other side, I'm wondering, when does it stop? When is the time that it's not important anymore to let people know that I'm a Yazidi and that the arts that they see is related to what my background is? When does Migrantenkunst is not an important term anymore in Germany? Yeah, and I wished it wasn't important, to talk about that gaze, that white gaze in Germany, but it kind of influences the decisions I make on stage, and I'm kind of unlearning it. I try my best, but it's really hard. It's really hard to just stick with what you want to tell without seeing the outer gaze.
What is the outer gaze to you?
Yeah, it's the white, Western, Christian, heteronormative gaze. I think what is also important is to look at the site you are performing, showing a piece, like looking at the institution, looking at the curation, looking at the program, and to locate yourself in all that, and to see, I'm doing it the whole time. Like, okay, who am I now as a performing artist? Yeah, and it makes a difference if you show your piece on stage of a bigger institution where the audience is completely separated from you. It happened recently. I had the audience very close to me. It made such a difference because they were much more included also emotionally and carried the piece somehow with their presence and the energy. And it felt like a safe space when I showed it, because I could see that people could relate to what I show, and the situation of, the audience relates so easy to me. I think if that would have happened more often, then I would tell other stories today. I think maybe I would do more Shakespeare, Yes. When I had a stay in San Francisco and I was in the mission, I know it's so touristy, right? But I was there to be at a queer indigenous, the annually queer indigenous film festival. Oh my God, I loved it so much, everything around it. Like with the beginning, having these rituals together, the audience with the people on stage, that felt so natural to me, and I was never experiencing this before, being at a film festival and starting with some rituals that felt so normal, at that moment.
Like what? What were the rituals like?
Some prayers and I could relate to, because we also pray to the sun as Yazidis. So for me, it was so normal to stand up and to pray to the sun, to the earth. And then I think then I started to cry through the whole evening, and not not only because of what happened, like I really wanted to enjoy it, but I had this thought on my mind. What do you do after this? When you go back to Germany, when you experience this and you felt so normal here. Yeah, this gave me this scary thought of, wow, how would my life look like if I would experience this more often, what they experience here, what they do here.
Any answers?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I would less feel like an angry brown woman, maybe, when I tell my critics, or when I'm again the only one in the room who has to, point out to some intersectional questions. But it's just, I say that now, and of course, I don't know how the reality is.
Being the daughter of guest workers in Germany is a big topic for you, and it would be great if you could share something about that.
Yeah. How can you grow and protect yourself at the same time? Because I remember how I made myself smaller in many situations too, to protect myself towards hatred, envy, whatever. I remember that there was always this invisible barrier telling me not to go further, not any step further, not to get closer to them, to their position. And in all that, you're trying to heal, right? You're trying to process your family history and so on. And I remember I was very active in the field of family narratives related to Holocaust. And I remember my teacher asked me, well, Saki, where actually is the memorial remembering your grandparents who came here and helped Germany in a huge economical way? Like, where's their memorial? What she meant was, have you ever thought about your own family narratives? And then I realized I have never thought about any guest worker history narrative in my own family. And not because no one would talk about it at home, but I realized that nobody asked for it, and there was no space for it, talking about the Yazidi history or the guest worker history, because I was so busy with filling all those other boxes, achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve, so that I lost kind of, I almost lost the connection to who I am, where to locate my own family heritage. There was no time for that, because it wasn't asked. It was no interest in it in the public school. No representatives in school books or whatever, So
In what context were you studying the Holocaust?
I was in like an exchange seminar between Germany and Israel at the School of Social Work, here in Berlin. But also before, for me, it was always a big part of my political interest. And it was something it was also a part of our family narrative. My grandmother and my father, they would always talk a lot about their Jewish neighbors and about
Their Jewish neighbors where?
in Syria, and also in Turkey, and people who were missing then one day. So this missing thing, that people were missing one day is very big in our family narrative. And I realized that we were talking more about Armenian and Jewish neighbors who had to leave the village one day because it was not safe anymore. We were more talking about them than talking about our own wounds. I realized that later, and so what my teacher pointed out was a way to, hey, have you faced your own enough? I also grew up close to Bergen-Belsen. So Bergen-Belsen was also
The concentration camp?
The concentration camp, Bergen-Belsen, was close to my home. And we would go there on Sundays. It was, yeah. Now, when I look back, I know this was a way maybe also to cope with what happened in their villages. I decided to write my thesis about guest worker history and about how it's represented and told, what's the official narrative in Germany. And it wasn't easy. It's not just, working through archives. It always touches your deeper self. And talking about invisible wounds, I understood why we were not talking about that at home. Because doing research on guest worker history, or that part of guest worker history of your own family, means, talking about trauma, the way they were recruited from the home countries, the way they were treated when they arrived, the way they were labeled as working bodies who are useful or not useful, and for what are they useful, and when they're not useful anymore, they were sent home. The politics around that all was so dehumanizing, we were not meant to stay here. We were not meant to be a part of the society. And I could understand why they wouldn't go deeper in that at home. And sometimes, it's a welcome tragedy to turn your back on your former life, when my mother would always tell me, well, I can tell good stories about my childhood, but it wasn't easy. There was a relief in leaving the country, leaving the home country and coming to Germany. There was a relief in that. And they kind of wanted to do a new start, and to work on a better future for their children. I can't judge them. Yeah, I totally understand that when there's no space given in a society for the history you come from, it's not just my parents' choice or my family's choice not to talk about something. It was also so easy to not talk about it because nobody asked and nobody was interested in that, When you compare it to this New Yorker way of embracing working class immigration history, you can't say that about Germany. It's not a thing in Germany. So I totally understand that this got lost, but here we are. I have the strength to work through that and to tell something about it. But it's also sometimes annoying when you feel that it's kind of that you have to do it. Because if you don't do it,
nobody will.
Nobody will, and you kind of are the archive of your family, the chosen archive.
What else is important?
I think the politics of pleasure are also important. To remember that life is also for joy, and that joy is a way of resistance. This is what I try to live. Like, I have this side of being very, talking about intersectional questions in lectures and workshops and all that. But at the same time, the joy is very important to not forget that. Like, the most inspiring people are the survivors to me. They showed me, I remember doing those interviews, and you could see that they were just waiting to laugh with you. They were just waiting for the next joke. They had this thing of, that tragedy was so close to the humor we shared. And I will not forget that this thing of that you could see that they were just waiting to get back to doing a joke and to laugh with you, And I thought by myself, yes, of course you want to get back to joy and laughter.
And we're talking about your work with Yazidi survivors, right?
Yes.
That's important to say.
Yeah.
On a different topic, do you feel the need to be seen, or is being on stage visibility enough for you?
I come from, like, I was on stage as a teenager already. Like, I come from the theater kind of way, and I was a singer back then also. So for me, it's part of my teenage years to be seen on stage and or be seen in class, because I was a really funny little girl and who was really playful. So it's also part of my identity. But then when I got into those questions I mentioned to you before about about the remembrance culture, and then this chapter began of going deeper into research and processing history and locating myself and all that. I kind of got invisible, and I needed that. And then there was a point, I think, at least 2014, it came to my mind, this thought, we have to be visible. And it was a collective thought. You can say that there was a rising of the Yazidi community worldwide because, the Yazidis realized, well, our agency is not big enough. Maybe this would not have happened if our agency would have been bigger. So we have to be more visible. And well, I think it is a collective thing, and it definitely pushed me. And it also pushed me into stages and writing, publishing, starting to spreading myself onto several stages. And I think I'm still in that process, or, And it also came along with that you could observe that the female Kurdish and Yazidi body was like not presenting itself in media. It was always presented by others, by journalists and so on. So, and that also made me so angry that, I decided, no, I decide how to be seen as a female Yazidi body. At least that one single body, I will decide that, And that also pushed me. Also, when you have this thing of when you're the first one in your family that became an academic and so on, being the first one doing that, being the first one doing that, it's very hard to make a step back, You're in this, you know that you're not doing it for yourself only,
So you mean there's sort of also pressure?
Yeah, it can be a pressure, or you can see it as your purpose,
Again, a slightly different topic. How have you been experiencing the news of the war in Ukraine?
I have to be honest. So, of course, I didn't expect it to escalate, right? That way. And to be, that horrible. And to be honest, I couldn't stand the media. I think it's very important to say how we perceive the wars. Like, and when we just perceive them through media, what is that? Like, this is you've got pictures, you got reports, and then you meet the people who came here, and I think I'm thankful for like having met actually people from Ukraine, or having Ukrainians in my, like, I know, and I could talk about. I think this was, and also be like listening to them and to really ask them how they are doing, what can I do, what they feel about being here now, and hearing all that, because maybe I remembered how it was for me being in Germany and hearing what could have happened to me if I was in Iraq. So for me, I think the most important part was to be there, to be strong, to making the ones I met feel that when they choose to stay in Berlin, please stay in Berlin, and helping to feel home, and also seeing the pain, not ignoring the pain, and not ignoring the tragedy, and not pushing them into fake normality, but also, standing it, being,
So what do you think? You think trauma can have a positive impact on one's life?
I think the first step is when you define the trauma as a trauma, like even having those words to define it like that, and when it goes, with feelings, or when it goes with feelings you want to feel. Do you want to go through pain? Do you want to go through this vague feeling of wandering through something, but not being concrete about it? And do you want to turn it into something powerful? And I respect so much when people survive or survive every day, and found strategies to cope. And I think in a community, or when something is collective, when you have a collective trauma, let's say, I really like the idea of everyone has another part in that. Like, you are the one who has to heal. I'm the one who's able to talk about it. Another one is like able to choose the way to court and to fight for the community, and another one is singing about it. I like the idea of that we all have so many different ways to deal with trauma, and to also not talking about it. You're right, you're right to skip it, and because and also I think it's very important to state that we're talking about trauma, but that this term is not clear to everyone, and that everyone has another definition of trauma, and that
So how would you define it?
I would say trauma is consciously or unconsciously a painful thing, situation, trait, something that is not, that itself haven't spoken up yet, and that sometimes we are just wandering around it and never get closer, and leaving it as vague as it is. And sometimes we want to get closer, and we can be very concrete about it. Sometimes it even has a joyful face or a beautiful face, and that's that's my trauma. And it has many faces.
What do you want for society, for yourself?
I haven't written down a goal, but I have hopes and wishes, of course, behind all that I'm doing. And being so open about trauma is because I want to use the power I have. I want to use the power I could gain while others still have to heal or can't talk about pain. This is for me a way to share my power, and we were brought together, and for me this is a gift, being able to talk to you about it. Although, I was criticizing this term Migrantenkunst, and this dilemma of exposing yourself as a migrant or kids of migrant. Of course, at the same time, I'm hoping for a stable agency for the community I'm belonging to. I belong to the Yazidis, and I want them to have a stronger agency. And for them, I see we need voices out there. We need more Yazidi voices out there.
And at the same time, I wish to being an example, how, the diaspora can look like, how Yazidi diaspora and joy can look like. Because I think this is still underrepresented, to make visible that I am a part of German society too.
Thank you for all of this and for sharing. And
Thank you.
But is there something that you feel that we haven't talked about?
I maybe would have liked to laugh more about trauma. I don't know, it sounds so silly, but you know what I mean? There are these two different levels when we talk about trauma and genocide in public, and then there's this other level that maybe is personally more empowering when the mics are off. And this laughter is something that you and me, maybe we can share with each other, but the audience maybe wouldn't get it. Or it's something that we would have to make relatable and to explain to the ears that are listening to us, And I think this is something that I can imagine that, what I mean? People that share stories of genocide since generations, and this humor that is based on so much tragedy. This is something it's also very Kurdish, this dark humor. It's also very Jewish, I think, right? And I'm wondering if to which extent this can take place in a public conversation,
I think this is a really important and good question, which I don't believe we're going to be able to answer this time around. But is there something else that you feel like mentioning in the last minutes?
Yeah, I was at a conference recently, and Lucia Muriel, she gave a lecture about this danger of microaggressions and racism and anti-Semitism within your psychotherapeutic treatment, and how unsafe it can be while you think you're giving yourself into a space that is meant to be your space, and the space you should feel trusting, and that the opposite can be when people are not aware or are ignorant for discrimination. And also it's not a common part of the training to work on racism in psychotherapy. So it's still being ignored in the studies, and and this scares me. I'm wondering, when is the time, when can you really say, as someone who experienced war, genocide, dealing with transgenerational trauma, when is the time you can say, well, this therapy is made for me, this is made for me. I'm wondering about that.
Thank you so much, Saki.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This was our first episode of our podcast, Invisible Wound. If you liked what you heard, please consider donating to AMCHA. Your donation will go to supporting Holocaust survivors in need and their families. You will find more information in the link below, and don't forget to rate us on Spotify. In our next episode, we will be meeting Esther. She's an expert in the field.